So we're going to set up our pre-comp for our renders that we just set up. So if you remember, we left off creating some render layers for ourselves. So we've got those right here. Let me bring those in. And there you go. So you can see, let's bounce back over to our Maya file real quick. So we've got our bird beauty, cave beauty, and fog beauty. And I mentioned in the previous chapter how long this render time was. And it was something crazy. And I do want to bring up, so this was significantly faster. And it's kind of amazing because I was really able to really get the settings dialed for each layer. And so by doing that, it cut back on the render time massively. I was able to leave the bird fairly normal samples. The fog got much higher anti-aliasing samples. You can see there's still some noise in there we may need to work out eventually. And then the cave, I was able to increase anti-aliasing but decrease some of the other settings. You can see again there's still some noise in there, but that's okay. And so you can see I was able to get the bird looking really nice. The cave is looking pretty good because it's going to be out of focus anyways. And then the fog, generally this noise is happening where it's in the darker areas, so it's probably not going to show up anyways, but we'll have to see. So that was a huge success. I think the total render time for the 3 frames together was about 4 hours on my computer. So that was, down from, I think it was 12 hours or 18 hours or something crazy before when I just let it run overnight. So like I said, it was definitely a massive success as far as that's concerned. So let's begin getting this just kind of set up here. So the first step for me is always just, I've got 3 layers of depth as it is. I've got 2 beauty passes and 1 fog here. So I need to get those first set up in a way so that they're layering correctly. So we're going to always be doing A over B inside a nuke. So you can see we first got our A over B there. And then next we're going to take our fog and layer that over top of there. So already things are looking pretty good. We do need to get our LUT on here as well. You can see our highlights are all burnt out and not matching our render view yet. So I do want to create a vector field node to do that. And we'll apply 3D LUT. And I'm just going to connect this down at the bottom. And what I'm going to do here is set my color space in to Cineon, so it's reading the log version of this, and then it's going to spit out sRGB because that's the way this LUT is set up. So I'm going to grab 1D LUT, and you can see now that's matching what we were seeing in our render view previously. So there's definitely a lot of options with this. When you're using it, you can apply it on each beauty pass if you want to, and then layer things up. Or you can just kind of stick it at the end. Personally, I like to stick it at the end so that I can dial these things in their true linear form together. So for example, if I wanted to toss a grade node at the end of this and gain it up, it's going to still fall and get the same highlight roll-off through that lookup table. Whereas if I was applying this on each individual layer, you can see if I created that grade node now, and let's say I multiplied it down a little bit, you can see that these highlights are actually clamped down below 1. So I lose that high dynamic range, the super brights in the EXR. So generally speaking, it's usually a good idea to toss that LUT at the very end after your color correction and that kind of thing. It's still fine to do some additional stuff after the fact if you need to. There's not really a right or wrong here, but generally speaking, you want this to be happening at the end. Later on, we could even switch out this LUT so that it was actually had all of the color correction embedded inside of it as well. So if I'm doing things like, putting some blue through the darks or warming the highlights, I can do all of that. So cool. So next I need to get my background sorted. So I'm actually going to bring in another merge node here and get that swapped so that my B pipe can go up onto a photograph. So let me grab something here. Cool, so I got these mountains. Feel free to use some of this. I had to put some watermarks on it for obvious reasons. But yeah, feel free to grab this section in the middle here and use that portion as you may want to. So that's what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to get that placed in there, and I need to get this cropped down. So I'm going to create my crop node, and we'll set that to 1920 by 1080. And now you can see I can move this around wherever I want to. I can also go in and create a transform node before that, and I can scale it down if I want to. And you can see it's always going to fall within that crop now, which is great. So, hopefully this will be pretty cool, but we can start layering up. We can see. So I also, on my crop node, I need to make sure I have my reformat checkbox turned on. So great. So you can see now what's going on. So you can start seeing the mountains showing up. I can still use my transform here, and I can pull those up into frame. Maybe I even want to scale them a little horizontally or something like that. Remember, these are going to be out of focus, so maybe I want to use some of that area instead. So the other thing that's kind of nice about this image is that I do have a portion of the sky in there that sort of matches my rays, and so that was one of the reasons I chose this image. Cool. So I am also going to need to grade this up, because remember I'm dealing with that LUT, so it's rolling off the highlights. So I'm just going to kind of fake this being brighter than it is so that it falls within that same range as my rendered image. And you can crank that really, really high if you wanted to. Somewhere right around in there is feeling kind of cool. I do want these mountains to still feel kind of silhouetted against the sky. But you can see I'm now getting that really beautiful bright area, and it matches with my rays as they are. Color is obviously a little bit weird right now, but I do want to adjust something else. You can see, because I'm looking out into the fog, if I look at my alpha here, it actually goes to solid white. And that's because because of the angle of my camera, I'm actually looking down and seeing the fog fall away to infinity, and so it's returning that value that's almost completely solid. So if I go in here and on my image, if I just turn my fog layer down a little bit, maybe like 90%, you can see that starts to come back and you don't really notice it near as much anymore. If I turn it down to 75%, it's even less noticeable. Right in there is feeling pretty good. And now I can bring some of that fog back if I want it to be a little bit heavier, just by gaining it up or even gammaing it up a little bit. I can also try gammaing it down and bringing up the color intensity quite a bit. And you can see that'll increase the contrast, and I'll get more of those rays coming through, which is pretty cool. This is also one of the beauties of having these pieces rendered out separately, because you have this capability to go back in and do these kinds of adjustments. And specifically with something like this, going from that render to that, or sorry, I said that backwards, but starting with my raw render right there and going to something like that is a really amazing thing. And having that ability to layer that in and have that full control is immensely powerful. On your grade node also, on this fog, if you turn on your white clamp, that will control the area that's really bright where that light is shining down through it. So you can see that if I turn that off and on, actually if I connect my LUT into that really quick, you can really see the difference here. So that's with it off, and then that's with it on. It feels kind of dull in there, but if we look at that through our render, and again we flip that off and on, actually I kind of like it. Now I think about it, it's kind of cool. So we'll just leave it as is. All right, so on our background here, let's start figuring out what our color palette's going to be. I chose this image because of the brightness and because I actually do like some of those cooler tones that are coming through. I always imagined this bird would be exiting a cave into a post-apocalyptic world that was, practically in a nuclear winter. And so having this kind of, these cooler tones coming in could be really nice. Another story that is a completely different version of this is that it's actually deep in a jungle somewhere, and the scientist is trapped. So in that case, I might put some moss or rocks around, or paint some moss in just in Photoshop. And I'm going to experiment with both of those. But for now, we'll stick with the cool, and we'll see if it evolves into something else. So I'm just going to create a defocus node. And now I can go with my defocus node, and I can start bringing that defocus up. And, because the focus is pretty shallow here, you can see this is kind of the idea, is that I'm not really maintaining any of that detail. You can already see I've got a, I don't exactly know how many pixel blur that is, but maybe, I don't know, 10 or so. So I'm going to need the background to probably be maybe even like 20. You can see in some of the areas up in here, it's really falling away pretty soft. And so thinking about those mountains back there, the background, it's going to be something similar to that. So you can see immediately I have a lot of artistic license with this, and I can change this however I want. So to start out with that color specifically, I'm going to go on a grade node. And so I tend to, this is probably sloppy from a compositing standpoint, but I actually like to just have multiple grade nodes. And so right here, I'm brightening this image way up. And I want to have a second one that's controlling the color, just so that there's some separation. And you can label these for yourself if you want to. So you can say, brighten. And then the other one can just be my gamma color. So using the gamma is a nice way to just tint your image. You can see if I expand this, there's already a temperature slider here. So I can start bringing this warmer, and that will start introducing some of those warm. If I bring it all the way down, it obviously goes crazy. But if I start bringing it a little bit lower, I can start getting rid of some of that initial coolness, and I can start kind of injecting some warmth into it. You can also experiment, so you can see this is a good reason to do this, is maybe I want to put that, so putting that gamma above gets a very different result than having it down below. That's another really good reason to have these things separated out. You can see in the defocus now I'm able to get a much more natural color shift with that gamma that I was expecting. So yeah, exactly. So now it's almost feeling kind of sepia tone, and I don't like that. It's definitely too much. I want some of that coolness in there, but a little bit of that warmth to bleed in. And maybe a little bit more. Something like that. Now I can do something similar on the fog as well. So again, I can use my gamma slider, and I could actually start introducing some coolness into that. And now I'm really starting to, get somewhere with this. And you can start getting some really beautiful effects. You don't want to go too extreme with this. If I was really going to be doing this much intense color shifting, I do want to start getting those colors represented in my lighting. But right now, it's just subtle shifts here and there, so it's not really affecting. I'm not really at a point where I need to change the reflections in my bird because of this. It's just really adding, balancing out those color temperatures a little bit. I also think I want to bring back some of the fog here. Cool, that's looking better. And then if I feel so inclined, I could even put a 1 or 2 pixel blur on that to help ease off on some of that noise that I'm seeing. Sweet, and you can see, immediately, we're already starting to make some really amazing progress on this. So when I'm working in a situation like this, and I'm trying to relate this back to our look dev that we're doing, so there's always a lot of situations where I create this kind of stuff. I try to have a separation between the compositing driving the shaders, but rather than having, my choices I'm making in compositing drive my look development, it's more being able to see my asset coming through the stages of production while I'm actively working on it. And that's a really important thing to me, because if you start dialing a shader, and it kind of goes back to that look dev scene, right? if I start dialing my shaders and I get it to a really good point, but it's only on one light rig, and then I bring it in another one and it looks totally crazy, then that's a problem. I treat this compositing phase as the same thing. I try and go in and I start bringing my passes in, and I start working towards an end goal for myself that I really want to get some really nice effects coming in, and making sure that the way the passes are coming in and whatever I'm doing to something like a still or a lighting test shot is going to work okay with the look development that I'm doing. Depending on the size of the studio, you may or may not be able to really do this. If you're at a really large film studio, then there's probably going to be other people that are actively picking up your asset and testing it as you're working on it, so you don't have to, which is great. And at a smaller studio, it really may fall on your shoulders to do that kind of stuff. I was a CG lead, CG supervisor at PsyOp for a number of years, and at a place like that, it was there were big jobs and small jobs, and on small jobs, a lot of that responsibility fell on me, even just as a supervisor. If I only have a couple people on my team, a lot of that stuff needs to happen. So cool. So we're making some really good progress here. Even just having this set up is pretty nice. I'm going to go ahead and break out the passes on my cave. I'm not going to mess too much with the bird right now. I actually think I'm just going to put one quick color grade on it, brighten it up a little bit, maybe lift that gamma just a touch. When I started messing with the lighting, it started drastically changing the bird, and I really just wanted it a little bit brighter, and I knew I could just handle that in the compositing, so that's exactly what I did. I may render out a separate light pass that gives a brighter reflection right on the chest right there, because I do feel that that light coming in would have hit right there a little bit better. It's kind of hitting on the neck instead and on the beak, so I might just add a supplementary complement additional light so that we get a little bit more on that front of the chest right there. Cool. So over here on my passes, I want to shuffle out a few. So I'm just going to go through and get all of my passes broken out. And so I'm going to get my GI and lighting and diffuse first. And I'm going to grab my specular and reflection and all that good stuff as well, but for now I only need these three. So I want to separate out, you can see here's my raw diffuse, which there's just procedural shaders on these rocks right now, so that's all you can see. There's the lighting, and then, that was the GI, and then here's the lighting. The GI does feel very bright right now because I turned the dome light to be going through the irradiance map. So that's definitely a big part of that. But anyways, what I want to do with this raw, with this diffuse color, is actually divide it against my lighting and GI so that I get access to my raw passes. So I'm going to divide here. And let's swap that. There we go. So you can see, I also really quickly, before I forget, I want to throw down a unpremult, and I want to unpremultiply all of these channels so that I can go in and freely adjust my color as I need to, and I don't have to worry about any premultiplying issues. Cool. And nice. So I believe that that is working okay. Yeah, okay. Just double checking it. So there you go. And so you can see all of these things are coming together. I'm going to have to put that alpha back in there eventually, but for right now, this is working well. So this is my essentially raw GI pass. You can see I've got my GI, my diffuse color, and I'm dividing that out. What this is going to allow me to do is modify and add layers into my diffuse color and have it not affect the lighting in my scene. Specifically with this scene, Because these rocks are Dynamesh and procedural shaded, and I'm creating a still, I'm going to be doing a fair amount of just paint work in Photoshop and then projecting that back on. And I want to keep the lighting exactly as it is and only assign all of this painting that I'm going to be doing to this diffuse pass. So let's do another divide node, and let me switch that up. So that's the look of my raw lighting. Another thing that's kind of nice about this is you can see the lighting has some really extreme values. If I was trying to do something like multiply texture through that, it would be really difficult to get it in there. But the raw diffuse just has, our standard 0 to 1 kind of colors. So I'm just going to put a little, let's get my viewer sorted. I'm going to put a grade node in here, just not doing anything, just so that I can get the framework set up for what I'm going to be doing in the future. And I probably want to have a little bit more room over here because I know I'm going to be doing quite a bit of work on these passes. Cool. And now I can just create a multiply, a merge node to multiply. There we go. And then one more. And I'll set that to multiply. Great. And that one obviously didn't change that much, but it did, if I was to go in and say make this blue, the key here is that this blue is only happening in this raw color and not in this lighting. So I'll get the effect of warm lighting hitting a blue environment. Whereas if I was to put that over here on, say, my lighting pass alone, you can see it starts doing some pretty kind of potentially dangerous stuff inside of this. If I'm adjusting the gamma on that highlight, I'm not exactly sure what it's going to do, so I'm not going to mess with it. Much cleaner to do it this way. Okay, so let's get all this stuff organized, moved over. Oop, even bring my little dot with me. There we go. And now I want to add these back together. And I can even just toss myself some empty grade nodes in here, just so, again, I'm kind of creating a framework for myself to start messing with this stuff. And trying to keep it clean and keep it legible. And now I can add these back together. We'll set that to plus. There we go. Last but not least, our remaining passes. So let's go ahead and add those in as well. So I'm going to create another shuffle. And I'm going to grab my specular. And then I'm also going to grab my reflection. Nice. And then I can create another merge node. Can bring these two together. Bring that down in a little dot. And then we can add all of this together. And we can make sure that I'm not missing anything. So if I turn off my, actually don't, we can get rid of these. So if I turn off that one grade that I did, as long as I didn't miss any passes, when I add this together, that should match that, which it does. So you can see as I flip between there, everything's matching correctly. And now I can go in and start adjusting that however I need to. Cool. So you can see how these node trees can get really pretty large pretty quickly. So now what I need to do with this is my little rebuild that I've created. I think I'm actually going to, don't know how I'm going to line this up, I guess like that. That feels pretty nice. Got all my shuffles, got my lighting, got my reflection, subsurface scattering and whatever could go over there if there is some. I need to be able to get my alpha channel to come back down so that I can redo my pre-multiply and multiply against the alpha correctly. So I'm just going to hit K for a copy node, and we'll get this connected. And I need to bring this A channel here up to a dot, and I could create a postage stamp node for myself to bring that alpha down. And I'm going to, on my postage stamp, say hide input so that I can, you can see that that postage stamp is connected still, but it will be a little bit cleaner looking. And there we go. Wonderful. So now you can see I have my alpha back in. If I look back up here, the alpha is whatever I was messing around with in the color up there. And I can finish this whole process with a pre-multiply. And that merge node into my main tree can go directly into that pre-multiply. And that's essentially how building this up is going to be working. Cool. So I could group this if I wanted to. If you wanted to keep this hidden away so that your main node tree is cleaner than this, you can do that. One of the keys here is really going in and making sure that you're dividing out your diffuse color against your lighting passes. Sweet. So let's actually go in and we can dial this coolness down a little bit. I could also use a mask and only have that in that area. It's kind of a good idea, so I'm going to do that real quick. And I'm going to blur this mask. And we can really tint that hard so I can see really where it's reaching to. Maybe we even blur it more than that. Feels pretty cool. And now we can really bring that back down to a nicer level. Nice. Cool. That's feeling nice. Got a little bit of a color gradient in there. Very powerful, be able to do that. So cool. So that's feeling great. So I can go in and start, I'm feeling pretty confident about this. And everything that I just did, well, minus that roto wasn't really able to be carried through if I changed the camera. But what I was going to say is it's pretty straightforward right now to do a new version of the render and version up my passes using Alt up and down. And I can really just start getting this all set up. So this is going to be saved out into the nuke folder of the lookdev working files. It'll just be inside of the single Maya project that you'll be getting so that you have access to this so you can start doing your own stuff. And if you haven't ever used Nuke before, I think one of the really powerful things about this is, let's say I want to rebuild my passes for my bird. I could actually just copy this entire thing right here. And I can put a dot here so that my postage stamp is actually connected to a dot. I could copy this entire thing. And I can start getting the exact same type of setup created for my bird. And you can see here, I can just bring this grade node to the end of that tree. And there we go. And you can see now, if I look, so I've got my lighting. There's my reflection. And I want to, let's get rid of this grade node this time. Because I don't want to modify anything yet on the bird. So I do want to make sure that that is matching Looks like it is. So I wasn't sure if I had any subsurface or anything yet. May need a little bit in the leather, and it looks like I do have the refraction shader set up so that it's propagating through the channels correctly. But yeah, you can see, right off the bat, I'm now able to go in and do things like maybe I need to adjust my specular a little bit higher, or probably more likely it would be my reflection here, and going in and bringing that up a little bit brighter. Whatever I need to do, I now have the full capability of my passes. Maybe I can start adjusting the gamma around. Same kind of thing maybe I want to start introducing some coolness into that reflection to help match it to my color changes that I just did to the environment. So whole lot of control now. We can move this over here. Something like that is probably a little bit better. Great. And so, yeah, so we're making good progress. We'll probably just call this done on the pre-comp for now. And we can get in here and start modifying and doing the last little bits of tweaks to our bird asset here. And then we'll do one more render and bring him into our environment and get our image that we're creating finalized. So getting super close.